So welcome Professor Sznaider, Professor Natan Sznaider from the Academic College of Tel-Aviv.
Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to talk to us today.
Thank you.
You're going to be addressing the Council of Europe on the subject of the memory of evil, cosmopolitanism and the European project. For my purposes, I'm tempted to subtitle that "Never Again!" because one of the things that you say is that that's a slogan which does more than anything else to legitimize human rights work. Can you explain that?
What I see, what happened after the Holocaust and after World War II is through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the Genocide Convention that human rights thinking was not based anymore on the notion of human nature or what humans have to be or what they should be. But it is based on a kind of negative experience, a negative historical experience or negative memory. And
so we've seen where human nature can lead and we don't want to go there again?
Yes, and we don't want to go that road never again.
Right.
And that never again means what happens to a world where there are no human rights. So I think the big difference between the rights of man in the 18th century and the 19th century and human rights following 1945 is a negative foundation, not a positive foundation of human nature, but a negative foundation of what could happen and what should not happen anymore.
Is that because it becomes law-bound? It becomes based on legal rights?
Yeah, and it is based on legal rights, and I think it is based on the question of state sovereignty and a realization where state sovereignty and its extremes can lead to, and that it needs to be bounded by some kind of international organization, interdependencies, and of course the experience, the horrible experience of war. It's not only the Holocaust, it's also the horrible experience of war, of bombardment, hunger, hardship, all these negative experiences that I think out of those rubbles, the new Europe, the new cosmopolitan Europe, if you like, started to emerge.
So obviously the foundational experience for that is the Holocaust?
It's the Holocaust and World War II together. And World War II, yeah. The horrible experiences between 1939 and 1945, I would say.
And you've said that if the European Union were to apply to become a member of the European Union, it wouldn't be accepted because it's not European enough. What does that mean?
What I meant with that, was of course a little bit meant ironically, is that in an age where we have already the European Union is looking at itself too skeptically, too self-critically, and it's also taking itself for granted. I think the entire project of Europe is right now so taken for granted that people can even think of doing away with it.
So the idea that we all agree that there are certain things we don't want to happen again, that we have certain shared principles,
yes,
that we have a clear vision of where we want to go.
Yeah, there's no clear vision where we want to go, and I think that that in many respects Europe is a fact, but people don't realize it anymore. It's like the memory of the foundational moment of 45 has disappeared.
So is this a disconnect between the European project per se and ordinary people? Is that
yes,
what you're saying?
In many ways it is. And many people have forgotten what the European project is all about. So what you have now is that people think we have to do away with Europe because we have to think about our national interest. But they have forgotten that the national interest is basically a European project.
One of your criticisms of Europe is that in an age of globalization, Europe is more concerned with its own identity, its own vision for the future. But in a way, you're asking Europe to do that because you want Europe to reconcile its shared vision with its national peculiarities.
I want it to reconcile its shared vision with its national interest, and not only in Europe, because I think that Europe can be a model in that sense also for other regions in the world, for the Middle East, for the Far East, for even for Africa in many ways.
So is being European now a universal concept? Is it something which
I would say so. I would say that Europe could be a universal concept the moment people remember what the alternatives are. And I think that has been forgotten. in the whole debate about what's wrong with Europe and Europe cannot exist, people have forgotten what is the alternative to Europe. And the alternative to Europe was not nation state having their own interest, but nation states having their own interests and killing each other for those interests. And this I think, this is a period which has passed away. Nobody can imagine anymore France and Germany fighting their national interests with weapons and with tanks rolling across the border. It's taken for granted.
We've got the conceptual basis very clear now, but what do we do about it then? What do we practically do as Europeans in the larger sense, as world citizens? What do we do to actually achieve the vision?
I mean, there are a lot of practical advice you can give. I think that the crisis of Europe will be overcome. I mean, I'm very optimistic.
Whose responsibility is it?
And I think it's the responsibility of European citizens, also of national leadership. I think as an academic and as a professor who has taught now in Germany for a semester and have seen the fruits of the Erasmus program, for instance. I think this is one of the clearest examples of what Europe can be. Europeans can be proud of some of the institutions they have developed, and this is very good.
Can we relate this to actuality, to what's happening now in the world? And of course, in Europe as a continent, people are very concerned about migration. They're very concerned about having to deal with flows of refugees.
Yes.
Are these things, is this a time when the concepts of the European project are really under threat, or could these actually be phenomena that serve to build a common European vision?
I think we have to find a third space between the Merkelian "wir schaffen das," we can do this.
But is it clear was wir schaffen?
And it's not clear exactly what it is that we schaffen. And on the other hand, the end of Western civilization through migration. There must be a third space between these two visions. And that third space would be that the realization of what migration and what refugees actually challenge. And the challenge of the refugees and the challenge of migration, I think, is that the concept of territory and people, that the concept of territory and people and nation and territory and people is not holding up anymore. It's breaking apart, and it's threatening. It's enormously threatening, but it's also an enormously huge lesson.
I mean, it seems clear that that's the strongest argument that has pushed the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom.
Yes, it has pushed the Brexit. I don't see the British leaving, but maybe they will, maybe they will not. I think people compare them with a couple who wants to have a divorce and still living together somehow. Yes, so I think the Brexit is, of course, it's a warning shot. It's a warning shot, but on the other hand, it's the United Kingdom, and they always have tried to be a little bit different than the other Europeans. So I don't see this as a threat to Europe. But I see migration not as a threat to Europe, but I see it as a challenge to Europe. I see it as a challenge to Europe also that what happened after World War II, together with human rights law and a human rights regime, Europe has become ethnically very homogeneous within the nation states. You see nations like Hungary, Poland, other nations in Eastern Europe, that through what happened in World War II, they have become very homogeneous nation states. And minorities were either exterminated or they were expelled to their so-called mother countries. But people have forgotten how it was before, that your own ethnic identity was basically constituted by the presence of others. And now...
So it's defining yourself against others?
Yes, with others, against others.
Because it can be very negative.
Yes, it can be negative and it can be positive. You can define yourself with others or you can define yourself against others. But it's your own self-definition which is being put to test through the presence of others. And through the ethnic homogenization in the post-World War II area, this was lacking. And it breaks now, it breaks loose now. And this is why I think the refugee crisis is not only a crisis, it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to rethink what it means to be European, what it means to be Western, what it means to be non-Western, what it means to be tolerant and intolerant, as the debates here in France and in Germany and in other countries about Muslim laws of female dressing are concerned. I mean, it's a challenge. It's a challenge. What is right, what is wrong, and I think these debates are extremely important, and they're not threatening. They're challenging.
Professor Natan Sznaider, thank you for talking to us today. It's absolutely fascinating.
Thank you.